Call this meeting of the Emeryville Oversight Board regular meeting to order. Shall we start with roll call?
Yes. Board Member Helen Bean.
Here.
Board Member Aisha Brown is excused. Board Member Gerhard is no longer a member of the board. We've been informed by the Peralta Community College District, and there is a new person that has now been appointed by the Chancellor, and her name is Susan Rinn, R-I-N-N-E, and she will not be able to be here today, but I hopefully will be attending the next meeting, and we'll swear her in at that time. Board Member Gooding.
Here.
Board Member Harper.
Here.
Vice Chair Simon.
Here.
And the first matter on business will be to swear in the newest board member. So we do have a quorum of 4 at this point, and we will have a quorum of 5 as soon as Mayor Asher is sworn in.
Why don't we do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we can go to the first order of the day.
States of America and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Do we have any public comments? Seeing none, shall we go to special orders of the day? And Ms. Hemphill, will you take us through the swearing in of?
Yes, the first order of the day is the swearing in of our new member of the board, and this is Mayor Asher, who now that she is mayor of the Emeryville City Council, has replaced former Mayor Kurt Brinkman as the city's representative to the City Council representative to the board. And if you can pass this to Mayor Asher, thank you.
your oath.
Thank you.
And if you could fill that in afterwards, but
Okay.
you know the drill.
Okay.
If you can just read the oath of office in front of you, filling in your name after I.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
I, Jack Asher, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter, subscribed and sworn to me this 11th day of February 2014.
Thank you.
And our next item is appointment of chair and vice chair.
Yes.
And I will not be able to stand for chair, I regret. And it appears that the March meeting will be my last meeting on the committee. After 12 years in Emeryville, my family is making some changes, and given my new position as the Executive Director of East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, I will not be able to continue serving on the school board. That pesky day job finally caught up with me after all these years.
Congratulations at the Abalzi top job.
Thank you, thank you. Well, one of our main priorities is the San Pablo corridor, so I'm looking forward to working with the city of Emeryville.
I move that, in the tradition as we've done, that we elect Jack Asher chair.
Second?
So that second was Harper.
Right.
Harper.
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye. That's
I hear without exception. And for vice chair?
Well, Jack will always be here. Let's just wait until we need somebody else. You've never used the vice chair before.
We just used
We
the
did
vice
tonight.
chair
We did tonight. This is my,
10 seconds.
this is my third time chairing.
I think you could have handled that. I would have nominated you.
Okay. So are we did I hear a nomination for John Gooding for vice chair?
No. You don't need a vice
I
chair.
was sure that was a nomination.
I'll nominate John Gooding for vice chair.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Without exception. With that, I will turn the gavel over to our
Thanks, Joshua.
new chair. Thank you.
Okay, on to the...
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah,
We
sorry,
need to
Karen.
swear in the new chair and vice chair.
Oh, yes, okay. Another oath of
Thought she
office coming our
self-swore.
way.
Oh, I guess you gotta swear again.
Right.
Can we do it simultaneously?
Yes, you can do it simultaneously.
A duet.
1, 2, 3. I,
John
Jack
Gooding.
Asher, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations to all of you.
Okay.
Chair Asher, it's yours.
All right, on to item number 4.1, under the consent calendar, the action minutes. And
Move approval?
Second.
I'd like to abstain from that since I wasn't at the last meeting, Karen.
Oh, okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And one abstention. The report on legal fees incurred to date. This is item 4.2 on the consent calendar.
It's informational.
A motion to accept the report?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's been accepted. On to item number 5.1 under administrative items. Resolution of the Emeryville Oversight Board approving and adopting the ROPS for the period of July 1st, 2014 through December 31st, 2014. Deborah Ocker.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Asher and members of the Oversight Board. It's been 6 months, and we're back here with our next, with our current recognized obligation payment schedule for the fiscal year 14-15, for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, which covers July through December 2014. So in your packet, you have a staff report, which is a lot of just of the requirements of the law are detailed in the staff report. And I also put on the dais a large copy of the ROPS, because I know the one in the packet and online is difficult to read. And I'll just walk you through some of the highlights. The process here has become fairly consistent throughout the last couple of years, and there are a few new items that I'll cover with you, but otherwise the Department of Finance continues to change their format and change the instructions, and so we're working on keeping up with them in that, but I think they have made improvements to what's been done in the past. The first page of your actual ROPS 1415A provides a summary of what we're requesting for the current period, and it's a total of $17.3 million in total obligations. $3.8 million is the use of bond proceeds, which I'll go into in a little bit. $11.9 million is considered reserve funds. 10.6 of that is debt service, and I will go into that in detail as well. 1.6 million of the funds that they consider other funds, which are funds that are on hand that the successor agency is already holding. And then the new money that we're requesting is $7.4 million. That's the RPTTF money, which was previously tax increment and flows through to pay these obligations, pay pass-through payments, administrative cost, and then the rest is distributed to the taxing entities. So that's the cover page. In here, there's also the section of all the details of the new ROPS. That's called ROPS detail. I believe there's 4 pages of that. Then there's a report of cash balances that I'll go over with you, and then a page called the prior period adjustments, which asks us to report on what we actually spent in the previous ROPS period from July through December of 2013. So that's in there. And then there are some comments on the very last page. So here to just kind of outline what our current request is, there's still similar administrative costs, some program costs in there, the debt service reserve, of course. The new item that you really want to pay attention to is the use of bond proceeds. The first column there, we received our finding of completion in August, which allowed us to draw down on the bond proceeds. As you might recall, on the last ROPS period, we requested $21.2 million to use towards the ECCL funding agreement. So that left us with about $3.5 million. Here we're requesting to allocate the remaining non-housing bond proceeds of about $3.8 million. That's outlined in the last pages of the ROPS on item number 109. We're listing out that we would like to draw down that money to use for projects that are eligible through the redevelopment agency implementation plan. Now, this amount is a little bit greater than what we already have on hand because we're expecting to receive grant funds, which would supplement some of the $21.2 million. So we're actually requesting more than what we have on hand. We can always draw down less. So we're just trying to be safe that if we hopefully get that grant, we can do that. The remaining bond proceeds that the successor agency will have on hand will be purely housing related, and that's about $126,000 that we'll look for spending in the future years. There's also another item here, item 110, and that's $40,000. This was previously a resolution of the successor agency for matching funds for an EPA grant on the 3706 San Pablo Avenue property. So the city received an EPA grant. The successor agency approved a resolution to use RPTTF money for the $40,000 match, but we never put it on a ROPS. So this is just kind of following up with that and showing that it's approved through the Oversight Board and the Department of Finance, so we can provide that matching fund. Those are the bond proceed uses. Then they require us to talk about other funds. They call them reserve balances and other funds. And those are either monies that we didn't spend in the previous ROPS or money that we have on hand or also new money that we receive. So the redevelopment agency still has or the successor agency still carries on the activities of the redevelopment agency, which means we still receive some lease payments. We receive, there's settlements that happen, there's interest revenue. So that all goes into the other funds category. And then also if we had money set aside that we didn't spend on a previous ROPS, that's considered other. So here we're drawing down the $10.6 million for debt service payments. Remember, they allow us to always request the future 6 months, hold it in our bank until we have to pay it. So this is the September 1st payments for this 6-month period, and an additional $2.8 million of either new money that we've accumulated or money that we didn't think we were going to spend on this most current ROPS for the 6 months that we're in right now. So we plan on drawing all that money down and spending it. And then the new money is, the new money that we're requesting would be RPTTF money, shown here. The non-admin is debt service payments for March, which equals about $3.5 million, and then also items, about $3 million of the items that the successor agency is working on now. The majority of that is still remediation costs. Like I said, some other program costs, and the other new items that are on here that I'll just point out are items 111, 112, and 113. Also, I believe 108 is a new item on the previous page. So these items have to do with maintenance agreements that the previous redevelopment agency had entered into, and we're putting them on the ROPS right now. The very last item here is called Unfunded Debt Service Reserve. That's because in the previous ROPS 1314A, we had requested the debt service reserve that I told you about, but the county auditor controller didn't have enough money to pay that in full. It was short by $774,000, so I'm re-requesting that money. So this is what they shorted us. So it's not really a new request. So that's that pretty much covers what our new money is that we're requesting. So then the next section of the ROPS is called the estimated cash balances. Last time they call it fund balances, but I think they're asking for the same information. They just put it in a little bit different format. So this is a little bit repetitive, but here we're showing the bond proceeds that we had on hand, what we had left. The very last line on this sheet is, what you have before you're requesting this new ROPS money. So it shows that we had $3.5 million in bond proceeds and that we had spent all the reserve balances. Here it shows, let's see. It's a little complicated, but it's similar to what I was just explaining to you, where we're getting the debt service reserve, then we're holding it within the successor agency for the next payments. That's the $10.6 million there on the bottom line. And then the amount that we were short, the $774,000, is I'm showing as a deficit here. I'm not sure if they're going to like that. They may change the way I reported that, but basically we're floating that money because they didn't provide it and we're asking for it again. And then the admin money, we had a similar situation where they shorted us the admin money, but they paid it on the most recent ROPS, so I'm showing that that's zeroed out and we're even there.
It wasn't that anybody denied that 774, they just didn't have the funds.
Correct. The Department of Finance can approve everything that you have, but if the tax increment that's available for obligations is not enough, that's how you get less. And I can show you on another slide kind of how that looks. So that's the estimated cash balance report. I just wanted to put up, this is what you're looking at in your ROPS, and I'm not sure if they have the formulas all figured out, because the way it looks here is a negative $11 million, and that's really the sum of that debt service of 10.6 plus the negative 774. That's just the way their formulas add up, but I think I have it right in our books. So then this is just a picture of kind of what's happened historically. So ROPS 1 was a little bit crazy. It didn't even follow the 1484 rules. But starting with ROPS 2, this chart is just showing that the Department of Finance approved a certain amount, and then here the county auditor controller paid the amount that was approved on ROPS 2, and there was a distribution of residual property tax to all taxing entities of $3.9 million in that period. The next period, ROPS 3, this was kind of going back to the fact that we had requested a lot of money on ROPS 1, and they were netting it out. That's why the approval was only 2.3. It was a very low number because they were making us use all the money we had on hand. So the distribution of $11.3 million was pretty huge, and I don't see that happening too much in the future. ROPS 1314A, we didn't quite get everything that we requested, so there was no distribution. You can see that that red $13.4 million didn't quite cover what was approved by the Department of Finance. And then this most recent 6-month period, we received 14.1 as approved by the Department of Finance, and there was a distribution of $286,000 to all the taxing entities. For this period, if they were to approve all of our request, I have an estimated like $6.5 million distribution. So that's pretty significant. We're starting to wind down our remediation cost, and so I can see that number alternating every 6-month period depending on when the big debt service payment is made. So this ROPS is a smaller debt service payment, so there's more to be distributed to taxing entities. But it could be up to $6.5 or $7 million. So
Just one question. As the tax basis and the increment increases in Emeryville with the recovery of the economy, does that impact the distributions to the agency?
yes, the county auditor controller takes the amount of tax increment available as if there was not dissolution, which has been growing slightly, and that's available for all the obligations, the pass-through payments, and so it would allow for greater distribution to taxing entities.
Then why did we get shorted?
We have a lot of expenditures. The successor agency is still very busy with remediation and projects that we're finishing up. And so we are trying to request enough money to continue these projects quickly and efficiently and shut them down. And so we are requesting $13 to $14 million each 6-month period and spending a lot of it. So that's why. And a lot of it's debt service as well. So that concludes my report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, the ROPS that you have in front of you does actually have 2 changes to it, and also Paula Crow, our attorney, will probably want to comment on it. But I did make one change that was related to the reserve debt service payment. They want to, even though you're holding the money and you're not spending it until the next 6-month period, they want us to show it as spent. So they want us to report it as spent twice, and so it just changes the amount that they're calculating that we get to keep on hand. So I made that one change on the prior period page. And then also on the bond proceeds line, which I think was 109, that had under the project area name, it said both, and I believe it should be Shell Mound, so I changed that. Those are the only 2 changes.
The successor agency has approved this, right?
That is correct. There was an agreement approved for the use of the bond proceeds that was approved last Tuesday.
Okay. So I move approval.
Could we go through our attorney's concerns? Would that be appropriate? Okay.
Would you like me to review the comments in my memo then? I had a few questions about some of the items. First question I had was to do with the Amtrak obligation. There was information provided in the long-range property management plan that indicated that this obligation was no longer with the agency, but rather had been passed by sublease. It was described.
But wait a minute, isn't that in the next item?
No, it's part of this item too.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is a request in the ROPS, or there's an item in the ROPS that would have tax increment go to pay the station maintenance obligations. This is very complicated, and we'll probably discuss it more under the plan. But Wareham leased the site where and jump in, Mike, because I'm not sure I grasp all this.
Here we go.
Wareham leased the site where the station is to the agency. Subsequent to that, the agency passed this ownership or right, it appeared in the long-range property management plan documents, to the city. And there was a lease. It was described as a sublease in the plan staff report, but it is described on its face as a lease between the city and Amtrak. So that's what made me think that this obligation had been passed to the city somehow. Mike has provided information last night that indicates to me that that agreement is void, because as Mike has pointed out, the city had no interest in that property that it could lease to Amtrak. So that's another issue that we'll talk about under the long-range property management plan. But that indicates to me then, at least for the ROPS, if this obligation to maintain the station still resides with the agency, then I actually think it's okay and I don't any longer have a concern about it. Then my next comment had to do with Glass House. Now these are 50 units, condominium kinds of units of parking here in Emeryville, and it is publicly owned, And there is a request for funds to maintain the parking spaces. The problem is that under old redevelopment law, you couldn't use tax increment monies to operate for the regular operation expenses of a property that was publicly owned. So consequently, if it was void then, it's void now. The city's been paying it all along, and they have indicated that as of the end of June, they no longer are interested in doing that. But that doesn't mean that tax increment monies can be used to pay those costs. So. Then on the use of bond proceeds, I didn't have information when I wrote this on the housing proceeds, but I've been provided with that, and I think it's fine. I don't see any problem with the covenants and the proposed use of the housing bond proceeds. On the non-housing proceeds, however, the official statement and the indenture of trust for the bonds both say that the Shell Mound funds will be used within the Shell Mound redevelopment area. And Mike has described to me that the implementation plan that the successor agency approved as the projects that the bond proceeds could be applied to, the implementation plan includes projects outside of Shell Mound. So that's the dilemma. That's that issue. Then finally, on the Seraph loans, Section 34171D1G of the Health and Safety Code requires that the proposed payment schedule for repayment of this loan be brought to this board for approval before those payments can start, and that hasn't happened yet. So I think that can stay on the ROPS, I think, before we actually start spending money there, because we haven't met a threshold that's necessary in order to actually start repaying those amounts. And frankly, it could take a long time the way the statute's set up. But we do need to take care of that, and this board needs to see a proposed payment schedule for those monies. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
On the Amtrak station, the city gets, or somebody gets $90,000 a year
The
lease.
successor agency collects that money.
Right. So I want to just, why if it costs us $50,000 a year to mow the lawn, basically, and do some trimming there, do we need that from the state? On this, why we've got 90,000 coming in and we just use that to...
Well, you have to list it on the ROPS as an obligation to make payment for before you can actually pay it. So, and the 50 admittedly is just sort of was a number that we just put on there. Didn't really have any backup to justify that amount, and just trying to be safe. And so if we don't spend the money, it stays in the reserve, and you use it for obligations, the next time round, and we'll have an opportunity to, between now and then, to actually figure out how much we are actually spending on that.
Well, I assumed that the $90,000 was showing up in the other funds on hand category, so that it was all being accounted for that way.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure that was
But
consistent.
maybe Deborah can confirm that, I don't know.
It does.
Okay.
I mean, my take on all this leasing, releasing, subleasing, and whatever, is that when the word enforceable, if it's to be enforced by anybody, it's to be enforced by Amtrak. And I can't imagine what document Amtrak would bring to the court to say, this is the document by which I want my lawn mowed. The only one they could bring to a court would be the one that says the city of Emeryville shall do this.
Well, I would disagree with that. So let me walk you through. So initially in October of 1992, and before the station was even constructed, and the site that we now know as the Amtrak station was still owned by Chevron. You might recall you were on the council at that time. Amtrak and the city and Wareham talked about bringing a station to Emeryville. And so that October 1992 lease was essentially sort of the terms under which the city and Amtrak and the agency obviously was involved, and Wareham was involved. That was the understanding upon which Amtrak would operate the station. Then in March 2nd of 1993, the agency and Wareham entered into a participation agreement that provided for the development of the Amtrak station. Now recall that Wareham actually had a negotiated and executed a purchase and sale agreement with Chevron for acquisition of that site. So pursuant to the participation agreement, the Wareham assigned that purchase and sale agreement to the redevelopment agency. The redevelopment agency acquired the site from Chevron, then conveyed it to Wareham, and as part of that, Wareham then constructed the Amtrak station as we know it. It was all a convoluted thing to essentially provide for the redevelopment financing that went into the construction of that station. As part of that participation agreement, Wareham and the agency entered into a lease for the Amtrak station, okay? And recital D to that lease, that's dated March 2nd of 1993, provides that the agency will sublease the premises to Amtrak pursuant to the terms that are set forth in that lease that existed between the city and Amtrak. So in essence, the agency is essentially assuming those, whatever obligations those were with that the city and Amtrak had, and essentially is assuming that those lease terms and agreed to lease those premises to Amtrak as provided in that October 1992 document. So I think that's the basis upon which Amtrak says, hey, come and mow my lawn.
Yeah, well, I still think to be a stretch,
I
but
would
that's
also
fine.
argue that for the better part of 20 years now, they've been paying
Yeah.
rent, they've been operating, and I don't think, that the successor agency would be able to get out of any obligation that it owes to Amtrak on some sort of a technical legal reading of whether there is or isn't a lease between the city and Amtrak back in 1992.
Yeah, I presumed at the time when I was on the council that we were being pretty clever about it, and that we were getting lease revenue and making money for the city
Well,
on something that essentially the agency was constructing.
But wait a minute.
But anyway, that was just
What's
my
relevant for us tonight?
Yeah, that's okay. I don't want to push it. Like I
What's
say,
relevant, I
as long
think,
Focus on what's relevant tonight.
is that, in my view, there is a obligation under the lease to maintain the Amtrak station premises. So
And I agree with that. Based on the information Mike provided last night, there is an agency obligation to maintain the station.
That's not an issue, so let's
okay, if
take
you
that off
agree,
the table.
then I'll go.
I'm trying to get us to focus on what is at issue.
And let's see, what was the other one?
On the glass house, this is.
Yeah, the glass house. I didn't know it was the city's public policy to pay for free public parking. I mean, I would think that the city would be wanting, I mean, you're saying the city has been doing this.
The city's
Kind of
been paying
surprised
for
me that
those
not charging
maintenance costs.
for public parking.
Well, it's a pretty typical structure, too, because the law prohibited a redevelopment agency from using tax increment monies for that. And so if monies were used to build a public property like this one, then typically a city would pick up the operating costs.
Oh, okay. So that needs to continue is what you're saying.
Well, the city can decline to do that, certainly, but I don't think it's legal for the successor agency to now pay those costs.
Well,
I think you do. I think it is legal, and the reason I say that is because if you don't, you will be in default under the agreement that is in place between the successor agency and the Glass House Homeowners Association, and they'll be they would have the ability to essentially foreclose on failure to, because you are a member of an owners association, if you don't pay your dues, which is part of the cost that that is involved here, and if you don't pay for your share of the maintenance responsibilities, they can sue you as well. And so by not doing that, fulfilling that obligation, you're exposing, I believe, the successor agency to claims and to litigation.
And actually, I don't think that's true, because the contract was void because the agency had no ability to enter into it. It has no ability to spend tax increment monies on those kinds of costs.
Well, can I interject that there are cases where cities do a development and there's a period of time that's considered a transitional period. In the case of Oakland and Preservation Park, that transitional period, I think, was 20-something years until we bought it. But I think I would just look at that sort of loophole that a lot of cities have used to pay operations. But my point is that it behooves both the redevelopment agency and the city to figure out, because as you point out, it's not legal to do it long-term, and I understand there's questions about how long you could actually go short-term, but I would suggest that having some transition plan so that this isn't in perpetuity.
Well, it's partly dependent on what you do with the with this property as part of the long-range property management plan. If the board and the department approves for the transfer of that asset to the city and the city takes it over, then yeah, as part of that, we would obviously be assuming the obligation to maintain that. But if that doesn't occur, then the city has no contractual obligation to the successor agency or to the Glasshouse Owners Association to maintain those costs. And it's not something that staff would be recommending to the council that it continue to do.
So I guess the question before us is whether or not we approve it tonight to go on the ROPS, absent a plan for going forward, or do we take our councils, well, we have two different councils, counseling two different things. But so the question in my mind turns on whether or not this is an interim state where we're maintaining an agreement with a condo association so as not to be sued, and to give us time in this, long unwinding of redevelopment to come up with a plan. And, if staff is comfortable with going in the direction of coming up with a plan to unwind this, then I'm more comfortable putting it on the ROPS. But I'd want to hear from both my colleagues and from staff as to what direction this is going, and is this an interim thing or is this a permanent state?
Well, since the Glasshouse parking is in the long-range property management plan, that in and of itself is the plan, wouldn't it be? Because that plan provides for the transfer to the city once it's approved by the Department of Finance.
Right, and so that we do have that related issue. We've got some logistical issues here, which suggests to me that maybe the city ought to be willing to continue to pay this for another 6 months. The logistical issues, and some of them are fairly substantial, is even if there were no hurdles to getting this approved, since it's a parking garage by DOF, and being transferred as a government use because that's what's proposed under the plan, then we still have the problem of it's going to take, I would predict, 6 months to get this property management plan approved, maybe. And there's just no deadline that DOF has for this. So we're going to have a pretty extended period here where Mike's right. If someone is not able or willing to take responsibility for these costs, you could end up with a problem with the homeowners association. The problem, which we'll get to when we discuss the management plan, is that DOF has been consistently taking the position that parking garages or parking lots, parking use, is not a government use unless it's used exclusively for public employees or to support a public building like a courthouse. Now, Actually, I don't agree with that, and I think there's a pretty substantial consensus that that's not an accurate reading, but I think it's going to take litigation, frankly, to change their mind. So you're likely to see this rejected as a government use, and I wanted to bring that to your attention.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't proceed, and I'd like us to move on this instead of being so.
Well, I have to be on the record. I'm not going to vote for something that is blatantly illegal. I'm sorry, even if it's interim. It's illegal, it's illegal. And I'm not going to be on the record for knowingly doing something that our attorney has advised me that is not legal for a redevelopment agency to do. I have no problem with handling the property thing differently, and the city's been doing this all along. So for the city to continue doing this, and it's not a lot of money,
No.
you know, for however many months it wishes to continue doing it, I think is the way to do it, rather than to only now do we start doing something illegal as a successor agency by, for some reason, all of a sudden taking it over beginning now. I just think that's just wrong.
Well, it's likely to be rejected by DOF anyway,
Yeah.
if they're paying attention.
But I'm going to be on the record at no on this one.
Anyone else? Other questions? No? Okay, do we want to take a vote on 5.1? Roll call vote, please, Karen.
And it's on which one?
5.1?
5.1?
Yeah, that's the one we were
So
just discussing.
it's the resolution as presented by staff.
Yes.
I think just in light of the previous comment, I just
Yeah, I
want to
mean,
say...
I'll go with the others, but I'll do a motion to sever then, so we'll sever this one out so I can go cleanly on the record that I don't want to do that.
Right. And I just want, just to be clear, in light of Greg's point, because I think it's an important point, my understanding of what we've heard tonight is we have two different opinions from two different attorneys. And I understand, and I respect both opinions, and, you know, my understanding of our role is that we have to exert the judgment in between these opinions to try and figure out what's going to ultimately give our taxing agencies the least cost. And that's why this committee exists in the first place, because if we reject this and end up being sued by the condo association, I don't know that that's in the interest of the city either. So while I think it's important, your point is well taken, I do want to find a way to minimize the cost to the taxpayers. So I think that's, I'll leave it at that.
And also including it in the ROPS fulfills to a certain extent our fiduciary duty to protect the successor agency from future litigation.
Right.
Let's be clear what we're voting on.
So is the motion as is, or is the motion severed?
My understanding is that Greg wanted to sever this, this item, and I just wanted to, so we have one vote to approve the ROPS, not including items, I believe it's 111 and 110, is that right?
111 and 112.
111 and 112, thank you. Leave it to the chair to...
Is there a motion and a second for that?
Yeah, I'll move that. Oh, second.
Okay.
And now we can vote on the rest of 5.1.
No, now we vote on, it's been moved and seconded, and now we vote on
Okay.
that.
Who's the
All those-
second? I'm
Item.
sorry.
The second was Mr. Harper.
And that was for everything but? Here's the way you
Everything
phrased it.
but
Everything but.
11 and
Then we'll do the but.
So that's Simon Harper?
Simon Harper,
Yeah.
Okay.
moved and second. Can we
Those in
call-
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay.
All right. And then
And
this,
now on to the item that Greg wanted to sever.
I move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No. 4-1. On to 5.2.
The resolution of the Emeryville Oversight Board approving the long-range property management plan of the Emeryville Successor Agency regarding the disposition and use of property of the former RDA. Sabrina Landreth and Mike Biddle.
Do you have it up here?
So good evening, board members. Tonight you're being asked to consider the Emeryville Successor Agency's long-range property management plan. We have a PowerPoint presentation giving you a hard copy on your dais, and we'll move on from here. So first, AB 1484 that was enacted of June 2012, which amended the Dissolution Act, AB 26, again, was approved as part of the 2012-2013 budget. And it established a system of penalties and incentives to force and encourage successor agencies to comply with audit requirements. And you'll recall previous meetings when we talked about low mod housing due diligence review and the other funds due diligence review and paying money over to the county, et cetera. And the successor agency has completed those requirements and obtained its finding of completion from the Department of Finance. And so one of the incentives that was provided for in AB 1484 is that property would be allowed to be disposed of in a different manner than what was otherwise provided for in AB 26. AB 26 talked about disposing of property expeditiously as possible with the intention of maximizing value, whereas AB 1484 sets up this disposition pursuant to a long-range property management plan, and that's what we have before you tonight. The deadline for submitting the plan is February 29th, 2014, which was 6 months after the receipt of the finding of completion from the Department of Finance back in August of 2013. The long-range property management plan governs the method, use, and timing of disposition of all former redevelopment agency properties. The inventory that's provided, or required, I should say, as part of the plan has this laundry list of information that we were required to provide you, and obviously that is partly why it's 92 pages. So I won't necessarily go through all these items, but you can see various items that were required, and the plan provides that information as to each of the 10 properties that are discussed in the plan before you tonight. The plan requires you to identify and categorize properties within one of 4 different uses, which governs the disposition method. So their property categories are governmental use, properties to fulfill enforceable obligations, property for future development, and property for sale or immediate liquidation. And sort of a description there of the different categories, the disposition method, and discussion about how sales proceeds from that disposition is handled. You will note the sale of property category provides that sales proceeds are distributed to taxing entities, whereas future development property is retained by the city to be used for projects in accordance with the implementation plan. Tonight I've asked Leah Costella, our outside counsel, to come to talk to you more about that, and she'll be following me at a later time in this presentation. The 10 properties that we have are listed there. We have 7 that we've identified as governmental use. 1 is to fulfill an enforceable obligation. That's the Amtrak and public parking lot sublease. Property for future development, South Bayfront Site B, and properties for immediate sale, the Shell Mound Street lot. This is a map of the city showing the general location of these 10 different parcels, and somewhat evenly distributed throughout the city, just by chance. With respect to governmental use, we have 5 properties that are really intended to be used for parks. We have the Horton Landing Park, the Greenway at Parcel D, as we call it, Greenway at 59th Street, Emery Station Greenway Plaza, and the 48th Street Community Garden. These properties will be transferred to the city for development and operation as components of the Emeryville, as components of Emeryville's park system. The properties were identified in the city's general land use element and zoning as open space. These designations for those 5 parcels have been in place for many years. One as early as 1987, that's the Horton Landing area, through 2009. And those dates obviously are prior to the Dissolution Act of 2011. So showing you that to indicate that their zoning and land use designations weren't some, sort of post-dissolution action by the city to downzone and devalue properties. These properties have been on our target list for open space for quite some time. The 4 park properties, the first 4 listed there, will be incorporated into the Emeryville Greenway, which was an idea first conceived actually in the 1976 Emeryville redevelopment plan as a linear park that would serve as a buffer between residential and industrial areas. And finally, due to the land use designation as open space, these parks are presumed to have no commercial value. Again, Horton Landing Park, roughly 42,000 square feet, acquired in 1996, initially as part of the redevelopment of the Chiron campus, and eventually transferred to the, retained, I should say, by the agency for park purposes. The value of the property acquisition is roughly about $463,000. It's an environmental condition. It's currently contaminated. There is a cleanup plan approved, and there is some funding, part of our participation agreement with Novartis, Chiron. They're obligated to provide a certain amount of funding for the cleanup, and we also have some grant funds from the US EPA that can be applied to the cleanup of this parcel as well. The Greenway at Parcel D is down by the intersection roughly of Sherwin and Halleck Street, roughly 63,000 square feet. The parcel is in that left-hand picture. It's outlined in hatched yellow, but you should note that what is shown there is actually the parcel as it was originally acquired, and a portion of it was dedicated to the city back in 2006, 2007 for street purposes. So that's now Sherwin Avenue. And so the balance, roughly about 63,000 square feet, is what we're talking about. The acquisition then for that balance of the property is roughly $4.2 million. And the site has been remediated. Greenway at 59th, roughly 11,800 square feet. The agency obtained possession of that parcel in August 2010. It's been valued at roughly $510,000. The site's been remediated, and the site improvements are under construction by the developer, Emery Station Associates, pursuant to the terms of a owner participation agreement with that company. And then the Emery Station Greenway Plaza, is at the corner of 59th, or excuse me, Hollis and Powell Street, excuse me, and roughly 4,000 square feet. It was dedicated as part of pursuant to the terms of the OPA with Emery Station Associates. It was finally dedicated once it was completed in April 2013. The value is indicated at $735,000. The site's been remediated, and the site improvements have been completed. And then finally, the last parcel we've identified is the 48th Street Community Garden. It's roughly 5,200 square feet, acquired in February 2008, valued at acquisition roughly $262,000, and that site has also been remediated. The next category of governmental use that we have is the community facility, the Art and Cultural Center. It's the building directly behind you. It's roughly a 30,000 square foot, one-story, unreinforced masonry brick building. Excuse me. It was purchased in March 2006 for $3.65 million to develop an art and cultural center. The project was the Art Center was first identified in the 2000 through 2004 implementation plan, and the project was indicated that it would complete the Civic Center complex by acquiring the remaining building on the Civic Center block and converting it from private to public use, and also permanent exhibit space for the Celebration of the Arts show, as well as a year-round performing arts center. This project was continued in the subsequent implementation plans of the redevelopment agency. The environmental condition, it's been remediated, the portion of the site that is on the very southern end of the building, and there is a deed restriction for residual contamination that's beneath the existing slab in the building. There's one spot where there is some contamination. To the extent that building's ever taken down, there will need to be a removal of just a small area of the soil there.
Do we really need to go into this detail? I mean, it was all a part of our package, and we should have reviewed it.
Okay. Public use, general plan, land use designation, and zoning. It's got no market value due to that zoning and designation. Here's a picture of the location and a prior proposed project. The other is the Glass House public parking we talked briefly about a little bit. It's 50 parking spaces beneath the parking podium structure, residential condominium complex. Predominantly a light industrial residential area. It was constructed by Pulte pursuant to a purchase and sale agreement back in the 2006, I believe it was. And it's currently, as we indicated, provided free to members of the public to support the nearby commercial uses which have inadequate off-street parking. And here's a shot of the condo plan on the left, and just a site plan on the right. So there are 50 spaces on the bottom floor, acquired, in 2008 for $2 million. Then to fulfill enforceable obligation, we have the Amtrak and public parking. We believe the parking fulfills an enforceable obligation to provide that parking pursuant to the Amtrak station lease. And then it also fulfills an enforceable obligation whereby there was an assignment of the sublease to the city pursuant to the Transit Center Public Parking Funding and Sublease Assignment Agreement between the city and the successor agency, which this oversight board approved back in June 2012 and was upheld by the Sacramento County Superior Court. The site, here it is, Amtrak. It's the mound parcel just north of the station, roughly an acre and a half. The lease date, was in April 2000. The rent is $1 a year. Estimated current value is $0 based on market, and it is contaminated, and there's a cleanup plan approved by the US EPA and DTSC for that site. Next is the properties for future development, South Bayfront Site B. And the purpose for acquiring and developing was to achieve the goals of the 76 plan and the 2010-2014 implementation objectives, intensify development property underutilized, develop appropriate commercial and residential development to strengthen the economic employment base of the city, provide greater residential market, address and alleviate loss of tax base and jobs, and remedy vacant and underutilized buildings. It continues the existing Bay Street mixed-use development. It's intended to serve as a north end cap for the existing Bay Street development. Also worth noting that a new bill that went into effect January 1 of this year, the city, when it disposes of the property, will be required to find that the development project creates economic opportunity. That part of the definition includes if the project involves affordable housing, it's included in a sustainable community strategy, or as a transit priority project. The city's land use and zoning policies and regulations for Site B are consistent with being able to make those required findings. Site B, roughly 3 acres, comprises 5 parcels acquired between 2006 and 2007. 3 of the parcels were acquired with tax-exempt bond proceeds. That will be part of our discussion a little bit later. The value of the property at acquisition, roughly $15.9 million, exclusive environmental impacts. Estimated current value, we had an appraisal back in August of 2012 at $13.8 million. Environmental condition, the site soil remediation was completed in 2010. The groundwater remediation is nearing completion, so we expect to complete that this year. Then there will be ongoing groundwater monitoring, and there will also be a deed restriction requiring the installation of vapor barriers as part of any construction on the site. Finally, the property for immediate sale is the Shellmound Street lot. It's that parcel just south of the Marriott Hotel on Shellmound Street. It's a remnant piece from an acquisition of 3 parcels known as Shellmound Ventures 1, 2, and 3 that the agency acquired back in 1994. The plan provides that the parcel will be sold in its as-is condition to the highest offer received. Proceeds from the sale of this parcel would be distributed as property tax to taxing entities, and we believe the value of that property to be anywhere from $1 to $2.5 million. So here's the sort of a shot of the parcel. Again, some of the data about when it was acquired. 1994, roughly 25,700 square feet. Its value at acquisition about $515,000. Current value, and then it does have a deed restriction to limit the parcel to commercial, office, and industrial uses. Upon the approval of the plan by the Department of Finance, the properties are placed into a community redevelopment property trust fund that's administered by the successor agency. The governmental use properties be transferred to the city for that purpose. Properties to fulfill an enforceable obligation to transfer to the city for that purpose. And property for future development of a project and approved redevelopment plan, that property is transferred to the city, and the proceeds from the eventual disposition of the properties would remain with the city. Leah Costello will talk about that further in a moment. And then as to immediate properties for immediate sale, the Shellmound Street lot, that'll be sold by the successor agency, and proceeds are to be distributed to taxing entities. At this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Leah, and she can sort of share with you our views about the proceeds from the sale of Site B.
Before we do that, let me just insert here that Mike and I had slightly different analyses, but we got to the same place. in my view. What you'll find in my memos really provides you some background on where I think we're going to have problems or pushback from DOF, but I really don't have any objections to the bottom line analysis and the conclusions he reached.
Hello. And the reason I'm here is because this is a place where there is potentially conflict with the department's sort of expressed construction of the statute. And I'm going to walk you through relatively quickly why we believe quite firmly that DOF's construction is wrong for a variety of reasons, and that adopting the plan as proposed is the more prudent course of action. So the conflict or the dispute really starts with the Health and Safety Code 34180F1, which is a provision that was originally in AB 26, and it establishes this idea of a compensation agreement. And compensation agreements, and there are a few sort of key things to know about this statute. The first is that this really existed to address properties that were transferred in what a lot of those of us doing this work call the Mardi Gras period, the period 6 months prior to dissolution, when the state believes that redevelopment agencies were just looking to hide as many assets as possible. One thing that happened is that property transfers were made, and so AB 26 included this provision that said if a property had been transferred in accordance, well, if a property had been transferred in that way, that was originally a redevelopment property, then before the city or county could sell it, they had to enter into a compensation agreement so that the proceeds of the sale would benefit the other taxing entities. A couple of important things to note is that, one, this really addresses properties that are retained by the city, and that's the language of the statute, and it really only applies to the city, or in this case it would apply to the city. It imposes an obligation on the city or the county. It doesn't really impose any obligation on the successor agency. Oh, how do I advance this? There we go. Oh, down. Sorry about that. So then we move to 1484, 34191.3. And 34191.3, this is, I think, the place of confusion on the department side, is that this explicitly suspends some provisions of the earlier AB 26 way of handling property and property disposition, but it doesn't explicitly suspend 34180F1. And so as we move forward to the DOF FAQ, which is really why I'm here, I think this is probably where DOF is getting its belief that this compensation agreement requirement still applies, even though the statute really doesn't seem to support that construction.
Before you get off of that,
Yeah.
this is where I'm confused between what Mike is saying and Paul is saying, because it says subdivision A 31181 basically says that government use shall be constructed and in use, right? That's the one that gives that constructed and in use definition?
I'm not sure.
1A?
That's for the government use category. What we're talking about here is retained for future development.
So if you think back to Mike's presentation,
okay, so
there's
that's another category. Okay, well then I'll talk about that when we're doing that later.
So this really just applies to, and let me move to the next slide, which I think will make this clear. So 34191.5C2, it provides for the property to transfer to the city, county, or city and county. So if you look at 34191.5C2A, it allows the long-range property management plan to direct the transfer of a property back to the city, so long as that property is used in accordance with the constraints of an approved redevelopment plan. Now, in direct contrast to the language of B, which relates to immediate liquidation, and that's one of your properties is subject to immediate liquidation. In those circumstances, then the money that you obtain from sale of the property is distributed to all the taxing entities. But there's a clear distinction in the statute between properties transferred to the city for future development in accordance with a redevelopment plan and properties sold immediately. What the department is saying, and this is in their FAQs, which they publish to help us all figure out what positions they're going to take, is that if you transfer or sell a property, if the long-range property management plan calls for transfer to the city or the county, that you have to have a compensation agreement. And quite frankly, I just think that that construction of the statute is not supportable. And I'll go through some of the reasons. The first is it's just not supported by the plain language of the statute. 34180F1 only states that compensation agreements are required when the city retains a property. It just doesn't make sense to construe that as applying to a transfer of a property by a successor agency to a city. 34191.5C2A, and I know these the numbers can really start to make everybody's head spin, but the section that allows for the transfer of the property to the city, it doesn't say anything about a compensation agreement. And certainly it could have had the legislature wanted that to be included in the statute. And so this is, I think, the plain language argument is really one of the main obstacles for the department. The second argument is that it's contextually inconsistent with the rest of the statute. You'll think about, Mike pointed this out early in his presentation, that a lot of these provisions in 1484 were really meant to be carrots to get agency and city compliance to the audit requirements of 1484. And so this ability to transfer a property to the city for development in accordance with the redevelopment plan appears in that sort of carrot section of the statute. So to constrain that ability with something like a compensation agreement just doesn't contextually make a lot of sense. The next, and this is where I think DOF is doing it, is it really leads to an unjustified expansion of the department's authority. And this has really marked the way that DOF has handled this across the state, is that they just try to grab up as much authority as they possibly can. And so they're applying a construction that they say is supported by the statute, but what they're ignoring is that the original provision that required compensation agreements never gave the department any ability to review those agreements. It was a requirement for the city to enter into a compensation agreement with all the taxing entities, but nothing about that gave the department the ability to review that. But by requiring it as a part of a long-range property management plan, which the department does have the ability to review, they've effectively given themselves authority that they did not have, even in AB 26. It's inconsistent with the legislative history, and I've highlighted sort of the significant components of this, but the last language I think is the most important. This is from the analysis, the bill analysis for 1484, that the finding of completion, which y'all have received, is an indication that all amounts determined to be due from the former RDA or the successor agency have been paid and satisfied, which really suggests that once the FOC is provided, that there is not further requirements that the city can pay money or distribute portions of the proceeds of the transferred property to the other taxing entities. And finally, and certainly for purposes of your fiduciary responsibilities to minimize risk to the successor agency, this may be the most significant problem, is it really creates risk of liability from bondholders. I mean, 3 of the 5 properties that comprise Site B were purchased with tax-exempt bond proceeds, and those tax-exempt bond proceeds require that the dollars that were used be put back into redevelopment projects. That's really why the long-range property management plan has that requirement that the property transfers to the city to be used for purposes consistent with the redevelopment plan. That's the way that you ensure compliance with the bond covenants. But at the point that you say a compensation agreement has to be entered into, thereby allowing for distribution to other taxing entities, some of your taxing entities aren't capable of using the money in accordance with the bond covenants. You're not in the business of development or redevelopment. And so to allow bond, really what is effectively the result of an investment made with tax-exempt bond proceeds to be distributed to taxing entities without a requirement that those monies be spent consistent with a redevelopment plan, really, I think, jeopardizes the tax-exempt status of the bonds. And this is sort of the same argument, I mean, the same idea. I won't go into each of these individually, but I do think there's a very real risk that that to require a compensation agreement would violate federal law and create a potential risk of liability for the agency. So we believe the correct construction of the statute is that there's no compensation agreement required. I think all the attorneys here today have the same belief. I do think there is a risk that the department may not agree, and that might be a fight down the line. But I'll end with the fact that it may not, because the legislature, I think, to address this sort of stated position of the department that I think even the legislature believes is an overreach, has proposed some legislation that would make clear that compensation agreements are not required. Hard to tell whether that will get passed or not. There's a lot of legislation proposed to address a lot of issues, and certainly I think there's some hope that this would get passed, which would preclude the need for a fight down the line. But bottom line, when you look at the statute, compensation agreements really are not required, and so the plan as proposed to you, which allows for the transfer of the property to the city without any requirement for a compensation agreement, comports with the dissolution law. Any questions?
Questions?
Well, what's the effect of whatever we resolve one way or the other, whether we say, sounds like if we just go ahead and say, okay, let's go with your analysis, versus saying, okay, it does require agreeing with DOF. What does that change with respect to what we do today?
Well, if you decide to go with the DOF analysis, then I think your options would be to not approve that provision, to require revisions to the long-range property management plan that require a compensation agreement. There's a whole host of technical issues associated with that, because you'd have to negotiate those compensation agreements individually with each taxing entity. Whether that could really happen before February 29th is a question I can't answer, but it would certainly be a challenge. And I think that going that route would expose you to significant liability from the bondholders, that the requirement of a compensation agreement risks the tax-exempt status of the bonds.
And Paula, you in effect and Mike have come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, I think that last night or this morning, Mike provided a communication from bond counsel. I will say, as I said in my memo, that there is some range of debate on this, but bond counsel for this jurisdiction has said that this will violate the covenants that are meant to protect the tax-exempt status. So that's been made clear.
So. And we are also under a time gun here, because we've got to have this approved by the 29th of February.
Well, there is no penalty for it not getting approved, unlike the ROPS, where there are serious penalties. That one you can't delay. And I wanted to add that what some jurisdictions are doing, where there's been a decision that a compensation agreement has to be obtained. I mean, DOF is refusing to approve these without it so far. So what some folks are doing is that they're saying that they'll get one, not that they'll have one now, but they'll get one. And there's a mechanism in the law, if this old section from AB 26 continues to apply, that says that if there can't be an agreement reached, that there will be an appraisal done based on the 2011 tax lien value, and that then the value will be distributed among the taxing entities in the proportion of the taxes that they receive. So there's a way, I think, that at least some jurisdictions are trying. I don't know what the response is yet, where you kind of kick the can down the road.
So what I want to know is, if we do this tonight and the DOF ends up winning out overall, legislature doesn't override it or whatever, is there any harm that comes to the taxing entities for doing this?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Right.
Well, there's a policy decision about whether you view the DOF's position as a policy matter as being more accurate. I don't think the law is as cut and dried as Leah, I think, does see it. I do think that the better argument is the one that she's described in terms of just the language of the law.
Yeah.
So I move approval.
Did you want to ask anything, or are you, Josh?
Before I second, can I just ask one quick question? If we do approve it and say, that we would get compensation agreements to the extent that they're required by the law, and here is our explanation as to why we believe it's not required, does that allow us to sort of move forward with that fight without going to court and save those legal fees, or does that just delay the inevitable?
I think it delays the inevitable.
I
And I
agree with
think,
that. I agree with that.
If it
I think
delays,
I think you have to take a position.
yeah.
all right, in that case, I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay. All right, on to item 5.3, the adoption of the 2014 calendar. Karen?
Yes. So every year you adopt a calendar schedule. And for this year, we checked and there are no major Jewish holidays that conflict with the regular oversight board meetings, which we recommend maintaining the second Tuesday of the month as now. However, the second Tuesday of the month in November is Veterans Day, so we would propose that that meeting at this point be canceled, and if needed to advance the work of the oversight board, a special oversight board meeting can always be established. I mean, the board doesn't necessarily meet every month as it is, so.
We've only been meeting when needed, even though we have them scheduled for the second Tuesday, right?
You still have to have a regularly scheduled meeting, and so if you don't meet, we then issue a cancellation meeting.
Okay.
And it's difficult to put a regular meeting schedule, let's say every quarter, when, it kind of depends on what the board has in front of it.
So I move approval of the proposed schedule.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
But there shouldn't be a need to meet for another 6 months.
Did you want to say something, Deborah, or no?
For the next item, I was going to just...
Okay, right. Okay, so new matters for future consideration. Deborah?
Yes, thank you. On the dais, I just put the cover letter from the State Controller's Office. So I had reported to you previously that they were doing their asset transfer review. Their fieldwork was completed months and months ago, but we just got the report last week. It basically says that, we had transferred some assets, that the transfer was not in accordance with AB 1484, but then we cured that by doing the right thing in accordance with AB 1484, so there's no further action necessary. So basically, we have a clean report from the State Controller's Office on this issue. And I'll probably include the full report in the next agenda packet, just for the record, or if you want a copy earlier, I can email it to you.
All right, thank you. And one other thing under this item, Paula mentioned that we need to consider the Seraph loans and a payment schedule. So
Right.
when will that be done? When will staff be bringing that to us?
It could come back when the next ROPS comes back. I don't think there's a need for a meeting on that.
So last week before, there was a broadcast email from the Department of Finance saying that you need to bring forth a payment schedule for your CRAF loan. Now, of course, you never know what it's going to fluctuate, but essentially their directive was to come forward with a repayment schedule that essentially tracks exactly what the statute already says about how much you get, which is 1/2 of the difference between the property taxes that were distributed to the taxing entities in the base year versus the prior year. And so anyway, it's sort of a silly requirement, but we will bring that to you, and probably the next when we bring forth the next ROPS.
Yeah, I think you don't need a whole meeting for it. Just bring it with the
Yeah.
ROPS.
Yeah.
It's in the statute. I agree it's a silly requirement, but it's a hurdle that has to be met if you want to get that repaid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll do that, but we'll do, as we say, with the next ROPS.
All right, thank you. Okay, seeing nothing else on the agenda, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, see ya.